Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thanks for joining us from YouTube and Twitter for this live streamed Latino leaders discussion on life, young Latinos, and COVID-19. Where do we go from here? We're so grateful to have so many of you joining us today from around the country. We'll have an opportunity for questions and answers later on, so please send any questions to the email you see at the bottom of your screen. And please also share your thoughts on social media using the hashtag YoungLatinosCovid-19 and by tagging the initiative at GUCST Public Life on Twitter. Here in the United States, we're a year into a pandemic that shut down much of our lives and has had a pervasive and disproportionate impact on the diverse US Latino community. And at the same time, we're beginning to see signs of hope as more and more people get vaccines. During this Holy Week in particular, so many of us are reflecting on this past year, asking where we go from here, and thinking about what we've learned about questions like whose life is protected and valued by our healthcare system, which workers are essential, and how isolation has affected cultural, family, religious, professional, and social life. The initiative is happy to be hosting a discussion of these and other questions tonight among a remarkable group of young Latino leaders. Joining us tonight are Amal Caballero, the Regional Director of McClarty Associates Northern Latin America Practice. Alma has worked with the Embassy of Mexico in Washington, Mitsubishi, and the Brookings Institution, and was recently appointed to the Board of Advisors for Georgetown School of Foreign Service. Brenda Noriega is the mission educator for the Maryknoll Fathers and Brothers and a member of the International Youth Advisory Board for the Vatican Dicastery for Laity, Family, and Life. Sam Rocha is an associate professor in the Department of Educational Studies at the University of British Columbia. He's also an author, poet, philosopher, and musician. Sam's writing has appeared in First Things, Commonweal, America, Our Sunday Visitor, The Catholic Herald, and Church Life Journal, with a great article out just today. Adriana Smith is a writer and the founder of Emergent Seed, an arts startup that seeks to support DC area emerging musicians and writers. She formerly ran a tutoring, writing, and mentoring program to develop Latino youth leadership, and her writing has appeared in The Atlantic, The Washington Post, and the Los Angeles Review of Books. We're also grateful that Bishop Mario Dorsenville, an auxiliary bishop of the Archdiocese of Washington and the head of its Hispanic ministry, as well as the chair of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops Committee on Migration, is here to open our discussion. Bishop Dorsenville and the Archdiocese are longtime supporters of efforts like ours to lift up the voices of young Latino and Latina leaders. Bishop Dorsenville, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for opening our discussion.
Thank you, dear Kim. Always is a joy to join you in these wonderful dialogues where I'm sure many will end with some inspiration to continue to go on through, as you mentioned, difficult times, pandemic times. However, thank God we're seeing the light. I guess that the most important point is always to analyze that a pandemic comes into our lives. And even though we would like to see things at the same way or the same way that they were before the pandemic, something has to change. Something is going to continue to evolve and it's not going to be ever the same. However, the most important point is that Latino leaders have in the roots some structure that will continue to improve and will continue to face in today's pandemic some sense of hope, faith, and love to project. I'm speaking about all of you youngsters who are following and are going to witness these wonderful speakers. And remember that you have tools, very important tools that emerge with the culture. Not to say we're better than others, but we have a lot of wealth in our way to understand life. Latino leaders love families. You love your parents. You love your extended families. You love children, you love life. Latino leaders also, per se, they're joyful people. The joy is rooted in our way to relate to each other. Why? Because we believe in life, we believe in respect, we believe in the intrinsic friendship that we promote beyond our human encounter, the divine encounter. And that's why Kim and John have invited me here to lead you in certain prayer that we might never forget that we have the best friend with Jesus. And as Latinos, we also believe in Our Lady. She is our great friend. I am so happy to see all these immigrants coming to our country. When you see their necks, they have rosaries in their necks, and they pray the rosary, and they have faith in the future. That's what means for me that we're going to push in love, in solidarity, to go and to find new paths to continue to develop the post-pandemic times. Then everything, as Pope Francis reminds us, is about dreaming together. Let us get rid of polarization. It's not that you are better than others or the others are better than you. We are equal, we are human beings, and we accept each other if we listen to each other. If you really want to be a good speaker, learn how to listen to others. Learn how to accept others. Learn how to respect others. I guess the most important point is that you Latinos will remind the whole world that the respect of the human person is something crucial. And I really don't want to become a preacher in this audience. However, I just want to finish by reading a very beautiful small prayer that Pope Francis wrote on occasion of ending his powerful encyclical, last encyclical, that I invite you, some of you, to read, Fratelli Tutti. And it's a beautiful component of what Pope Francis says to us. We are called to action, and the action is to love each other, to be in a spirit of solidarity, and to move from indifference to solidarity. Let us pray together. Lord, Father of human family, you created all human beings equal in dignity. Pour forth into our hearts a fraternal spirit and inspire in us a dream of renewed encounter, dialogue, justice, and peace. Move us to create healthier societies and a more dignified world, a world without hunger, poverty, violence, and war. May our hearts be open to all the peoples and nations of the earth. May we recognize the goodness and beauty that you have sown in each of us, and those forge bonds of unity, common projects, and shared dreams. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Wishing you, to all of you, a happy Easter, and that this Holy Week might be full of messages of God. Remember, the best way to live a Holy Week is asking Jesus, what do you want me to do for you today? God bless you all, everyone.
Thank you so much, Bishop Torceville. It's always so wonderful to have you here, and we really appreciate you opening our discussion. And now let's continue this conversation with this wonderful group of young leaders. Brenda, let's start with you. You work with the Maryknoll Fathers and Brothers. You advise the Vatican on working with young people. You've been a part of the Fifth Encuentro and even had lunch with Pope Francis at World Youth Day in 2019. How's the COVID-19 shutdown affected you and your family and your friends, the communities you're in? What have you learned? What do you see as some priorities and challenges that we face? And also, how can young Latinos face these challenges head on?
Yeah, I was working on the question, and I did a lot of reflection because in a way I've been very privileged during this pandemic. I have a stable job. I live alone. My family is doing well, but also I have experienced grief, right? Because I haven't seen my family for now over a year, and I miss them a lot. And I have missed important events that are not going to come back, like the graduation of my baby brother graduation from college. He didn't have a graduation, right? And so that was like, yay, good job. But the effort of the entire family was worth it because it's really a collective effort to get somebody to graduate, but that's not going to come back. But it's still, that is still of like a pity feeling or grief, because when I hear the young adults from the International Youth Advisory Body talk about the pandemic and talk about how they are doing in their countries, that is very painful. They are really going through the crisis at a whole different level. For example, my friend Emil from the Lebanon, on top of the pandemic, they had the explosion at the center of Beirut. And just a few weeks after that, he lost his father to COVID. So now Emil doesn't have to face with the pandemic, but he also has to deal with the grief of a whole loss for the city, not knowing what is going to be of him, even for his studies and career. He has to go out of the country, and he just lost his father. And so now how to leave behind his mom and his sister, right? And so when I listen to that type of pain from other countries, I realize that we are in the same storm, but we are not in the same boat. And so that's why I say that I've been very privileged in this pandemic, but I have also learned that definitely we Hispanic Latinos understand what discrimination, poverty, and violence means, and how we know how to build bridges, as Bishop was talking about. And so I think that has given me hope in the last year, the unity of the community in the midst of the pandemic.
Thanks so much for that. The idea of family and unity bringing us together, especially with so much grief this past year. Alma, let's turn to you. You come with a different perspective. You're with a major strategic advisory firm. You've also worked at the Embassy of Mexico at a major think tank. And of course, it's great to have another Georgetown graduate here tonight. Tell us about how the COVID shutdown has affected you and your family and friends, your community. What have you learned? What challenges do you see out there? How can young Latinos face these challenges head on?
Thank you very much, Kim. Thank you, John. Thank you to the entire Georgetown community. It's always wonderful to be back to my beloved Hilltop, even if it's through a laptop. So that's the number one lesson I think that we have, and I have personally experienced from this, is the resilience and adaptability. As it was mentioned, we cannot expect that after the pandemic, we'll go back to the past, and that life is a switch that you'll just, boom, flip it up, and then everything goes back to normal. In my own personal experience for the past year, first of all, I agree with Brenda. I have been tremendously blessed because I had the flexibility to go back to my home, a place where I had not been for the past 11 years because I was living in Washington and my parents live in California. So I moved to their home and I was able to get to know them as an adult. And they were able to get to know me, not as Almita, the 17-year-old girl who left for college dreaming big and wanting to set the world on fire, but rather as Alma, the woman that comes back with character, that comes back with a profession, that comes back with a different perspective on how the world works because of what I do. And as you mentioned, Kim, I currently work in McClarty Associates, a strategic consulting firm that basically helps multinational companies navigate the political realities throughout various markets in the world. I personally focus in Mexico and in Central America. And over the past year, it has been a wave, an emotional roller coaster that I have need to be able to experience alongside with my clients, from helping clients to understand and be able to incorporate how to respond to the pandemic with their labor force, to proposing digital solutions in regulation that are being put forth by different governments in the region, and even to making governments understand how connected our supply chains are, particularly in North America. So I was able to understand and see firsthand how connected we are, and what happens in one place affects in every place. So we cannot only focus in our lives in silos. So that's the number one lesson that I've experienced. Also, I've been able to appreciate our social interactions, the small gatherings, the small blessings of life, just being alive, being able to be with family, being able to be healthy, and having a stable job. I mean, those are the things that we took for granted. My life pre-COVID was usually on the road. I was traveling every week from Washington. Washington was my base, but I was traveling back and forth. It was the first time in many years that I was able to sleep on the same bed for 2 weeks straight. So I was able to also understand and appreciate the importance of discipline in one's life. And finally, I would also like to just mention that not everything was bright and good in the learning lessons. We also saw the huge impact that COVID had to the Hispanic community in the US. For example, Hispanics in the US are 1.3 times more likely to contract COVID than their non-Hispanic counterparts. They're 3.1 times more likely to be hospitalized from COVID. They are 2.3 times more likely to die from COVID than non-Hispanics. And only 17% are covered with medical insurance. So that was also the not very bright lesson from this that I'm happy to dive deeper into further into the discussion.
Thanks so much for that, Alma. That's all wonderful and very interesting. Sam, let's turn to you now. You're a professor, you're an author, an accomplished musician. You've been published widely, and today you have a thought-provoking article in Church Life Journal about the intersection of racial injustice and Catholicism, and we've linked that on our resource page. So how has the COVID-19 shutdown affected you, your family, your friends? What have you learned from it? What are some of the priority issues and challenges that you see out there, and how do you react to what you've heard today so far?
Yeah, thank you again for inviting me, and it's so great to be here and to meet new people and hear new voices. I mean, for me, the most dramatic aspect of COVID is that it forced me to have to postpone my first ever sabbatical. So I got tenure a couple of years ago, and I was headed into a first sabbatical, and I was forced to postpone that, which threw me back into a teaching load and a service load and all those kinds of things. And it also forced our family. We live in Canada, in Vancouver, BC, so just north of Seattle. We were hoping to get back into the States to see family, and in particular for me to see my family back in Texas, in New Mexico and Colorado. And so all of that was put on hold. And I also was very fortunate in that higher education, in some sense, changed radically, dramatically, and totally at a drop of a switch. And at the same time, I think we discovered that there's a certain pliability in our work that at least for me, I wasn't aware of. I had never taken a single course online. I had never delivered a single course online. I was one of these old humanities, philosophy, hardbound book types. And I have to confess, I was even in the past very cynical about the idea of digital learning and whatnot, and I was proven wrong pretty much at every turn in terms of not only the capacities for human beings to create community in these rather abstract digitized spaces, but also in the case of my own teaching, realizing that there were certain tools that I was not using in my academic work that were just sitting right in front of me, like being a recording artist and knowing how to create audio and all these kinds of things. And so, that was for me a really wonderful discovery. I also had some losses and there's a lot of nostalgia in the last year. I think the statistics that were just quoted, they really hit me whenever my Tío Bobby passed away, from COVID, just one of those like a snap, a lot of my family have had COVID, and so sitting through, hearing about that. My last surviving grandmother passed not of COVID, but of other issues, and I, of course, was forced to stay, north of the border. It's a bit of an odd situation for me. I grew up close to a very different border in the Rio Grande Valley, on both sides in Reynosa, and also I was born in Brownsville, just on the other side of Matamoros. So I live now in Canada on the other side of another border as an immigrant to a country of Canada, while I was never an immigrant to the country of the United States, where my people are one of those La Frontera nos cruzó type of people who have been in Texas and New Mexico for a long, long time. And so I think in many ways it allowed me to reflect on just these difficulties, these contextual difficulties, these regional difficulties, the irony, even the absurdity sometimes, frankly, of like, what in the world am I doing up here? And one of the things that really struck me, in particular last summer, and I know now we're in a very unique historical moment with the trial going on, but the murder of George Floyd was really an opportunity for me to kind of perform an examination of conscience on myself, but also I would say on my community, which in this case I would think of, generally speaking, as the Mexican American community, Chicano community in the United States. And what our history and what our historical and what my own personal engagement was with forms of anti-Black white supremacy. And to be honest, I found a very mixed record. And I found a record that I wasn't in all or even most cases very proud of. And I also found a very selective way of interacting with history. So I love Los Tigres del Norte, Somos Más Americanos, right? That whole anti-nativist nativism, right? Of like, we were here first, you're the ones who aren't American, we're American. That reversal, that inversion, right? It just charges me up. That used to always, because it allowed me to empower in some sense myself as not the outsider, as not the alien in this country and whatnot. Now I still feel that way when I hear the song, when the accordion gets started. I get all the feelings. But I'm also able to interrogate it a bit more and realize that same sentiment can itself create certain exclusions, and in particular, I would say exclusions around the Black community, which of course is a deep and storied part of Latin America. The Afro-Latino is one of us, is part of us. And so for me, that's where this article that came out today works from, was this chance to kind of take a look, reflect, and examine my conscience in this way during COVID.
Thanks so much, Sam. That's wonderful. And I want to turn to you now, Audrey. Like Alma, you're a Georgetown graduate. You've worked on efforts to foster Latino youth leadership. You're a writer who's been published in many prominent outlets. You're the founder of Emergent Seed, which is an arts startup, for those of you who don't know, and it supports DC area emerging musicians and artists. So important, particularly in this time. Audrey, how has COVID-19 affected you and your friends and family and your circles? And what have you learned? What issues and challenges do you see ahead? And how can we face them?
Well, thank you, Kim, and to the Georgetown team and the community and everyone watching. I think COVID has been a clarifying time. And I hear that word echoed among my colleagues here, that speaking from the performing arts specifically, an entire industry was pretty much decimated overnight. And it was a moment in time for artists of all genres to say, what do I do now? Where do we go from here? And given that we have this time, what will I do with it? Who do I want to be? What are the projects that I've always wanted to work on, but never was able to pursue for various reasons? And before I started Emergent Seed, I ran an open mic series here in DC. I'm from this area. I was actually born at Georgetown, so this is very much my home. And it was honestly one of the most fulfilling things that I've done, to gather people to share what they make. And obviously we couldn't meet once COVID hit. And I turned around to my pod, which is my family, and said, what do we do? I want to help artists. And it was very much a family effort to start Emergent Seed based off of this idea of discovering and helping share the work of local, diverse, high quality artists of multiple genres. COVID has shown us how important our local resources are, whether it's a hospital or a park. And I think in a similar way, we need to acknowledge and nurture our creative local resources. So the last year has been a very humbling and incredibly exciting time to discover the immense talent and creativity in this DC region. Emerging is not just defined by age. I think that there are so many musicians and writers of multiple genres that have been working here for many years, and DC has a very rich history of creativity. I asked a number of artists before coming on tonight who are Latinx, and asked them how they defined the last year and how it affected their work. So obviously we all know that their income, a huge percentage of income was lost, but necessity is the mother of invention. And in this case, I'd like to say creativity. And so I've seen a lot of artists firsthand take on learning new skills, starting their solo careers, learning how to have a better presence on social media. And it really all comes down to connection. And I really appreciate Bishop Dorstensville opening that, Latinos love to be together. And it's especially hard when we can't gather in person, but there have been so many ways that we've been able to make new connections virtually. And I'll speak for myself that would have been either much harder or taken a lot longer had I had to face, driving through DC rush hour traffic to get somewhere or speaking to someone in a much higher position. COVID has clarified things to say that art is about sharing and connection.
I always think, Audrey, of Pope Francis talks about we have to emerge from this better, right? And I think when you talk about creativity and how so many people have, especially in the arts community, have reached inside and been creative and brought that forward, that's one of the ways we come forward better. Now I'd like to sort of open the conversation with all of you, and maybe we'll start with you, Brenda. I always remember at this time last year, Pope Francis, I'm not sure if you all remember, he sat in this he came out in St. Peter's Square all alone, rainy, dark night, and it was just this iconic moment and image of him saying to us, as we hear so many times in the gospel, be not afraid, right? And he said at that time, embracing the Lord in order to embrace hope, that is the strength of faith, which frees us from fear and gives us hope. So Brenda, what gives you hope right now? What resources can young Latinos around the country draw on in order to resist fear and live in hope? And anybody else after Brenda who wants to jump in on that?
Honestly, community. I think different organizations have been collaborating, and just doing everything virtually has made it easier. Definitely ministers. I am a minister, and ministers are a type of artist in a way, right? And we are artists in the way we accompany other young people, and the way we bring the gospel to others, and the way we do faith sharing. And we've been very creative. We had to be very creative throughout the pandemic at the parish level, the diocesan level, organizations, institutions, and that brings me hope. But also the collaboration that exists even between different parishes in Region 11, which is California, Hawaii, and Nevada. The different dioceses came together to offer different opportunities for young adults across the region. And so that gives me a lot of hope. But we are not thinking individually, but we are actually thinking collectively. What gives me also hope is that we are looking now to the world. We have now this global vision. It's not, I think the pandemic, some people say it's an equalizer. I don't believe it's an equalizer. I think it has set us in, the pandemic has been the point of reference to understand what others are going through. However, like I said before, we are in the same storm, but not in the same boat. We still have many other countries who are going through way worse situations than we are in the United States. So the fact that we are now looking beyond the border that gives me a lot of hope. And I'm just really hoping that we can, after the pandemic, if there's going to be an after the pandemic, that we can continue looking south and north and in all directions and get out of our isolation as a country.
I wonder if we can take that question to you. I mean, I really take Brenda's point very well. First of all, I'd love to ask you and think have your thoughts on what brings you hope, but also how do we go out of ourselves here and look again beyond the U.S. And also connect with the sufferings of those beyond our border.
Thank you, Kim. I fully agree with what Brenda mentioned. What I would add is that what brings me hope is the bravery that we find in the youth. There is this energy that it's so unique to us that we're unstoppable, and we want to use everything at our disposal to make sure that our voices are heard and that we speak and that we provide solutions to problems. I think that COVID is a problem that actually became this lens as to how unprepared we were. As to how science was not at the forefront of decision making or policies that were enacted throughout the world. What brings me hope is that despite the deep grief and the terrible tragedy that many people felt through loss of loved ones, or through loss of jobs, or through just loss of what they conceived of a normal life, will allow us to be prepared for whatever is to come. And that spirit of being unstoppable and wanting to, what Georgetown always says, set the world on fire, will become much more present in how we live and how we act and how we behave with others. We're becoming more present and more grateful at the small things. And that's what COVID has forced us to be. It has forced us to be more human. So I think that is the essence of what brings me hope, that we're not going to be a statistic, we're not going to be a transaction, we're not going to be a news, we're going to be much more empathetic and have this solidarity among the engagements and the way that we behave and how we bring that also into our work. People will live, I am hopeful about it, in a much more purposeful and driven life. And that is because we were able to see, because of that pandemic, how fragile life can become. So that is what I would answer.
That's wonderful. I think that's something we've all learned, right? Is that, and again, I don't mean to keep coming back to Pope Francis, but the idea that these aren't abstract questions, that when we talk about the border, we're talking about human beings with names and faces and lives and sufferings. And again, we need to reach for that hope. Audrey, how about you? Do you want to weigh in on this?
I'd love to. So Sam brought up the role of racial justice in the last year. And I think, again, something when I surveyed artists, Latinx artists, they kept coming back to the interdependence of racial and economic justice, that we need to lift up a community. And one thing that I'm seeing is more mentorship and more professional development opportunities that organizations are seeking to establish and to build and to reach out to communities of color, people of diverse and marginalized backgrounds. Specifically, I sit on the board of the Crimson Bridge Foundation, and I'm really proud of the Leader Bridge program that they've run for several years now, but recently with a new name, which is essentially to partner with local leadership development programs to help advise them on increasing the number of applicants and participants from communities of color to develop nonprofit leaders across varying sectors. And there's been a large percentage increase of interest, of outreach. I can pull up the numbers here in a second, but I think the last summer was a real reckoning for organizations to say we need to do more work on bringing in more voices from diverse backgrounds, and that brings me hope that people are taking that seriously.
Absolutely. And that's a great way to go to you, Sam. I'd love to sort of come back to your discussion of how racism and discrimination and inequality have shaped the challenges revealed by the pandemic, and our responses to them. And maybe in this, you might want to, I would love to hear about signs of hope from you too. Anything you want to talk about in terms of those larger issues?
Yeah, thank you. I think these are all great. I mean, it's hopeful to hear about hope in an interesting way. The conversation itself, these gatherings are, I think, moments to kind of speak hope into being in a kind of a way. Maybe just anecdotally, I didn't go to Georgetown. I went to Franciscan University of Steubenville. And I remember it was my junior year in particular. A Latina woman, Hispanic woman from the local community who frequented the liturgies. She mentioned how it would be wonderful if we had Spanish masses, and I was asked to play music at the liturgies, and we started doing that, and they were, for the most part, very well received. Sometimes it was more difficult than I would have thought to find celebrants. Everyone seemed to speak Latin, but apparently no one could speak Spanish. But anyway, out of that came a small community of Latin American and Latino and Latina students, and we formed the very first Latinos for Christ kind of student group on campus. And that wasn't quite as straightforward as the liturgies. And I remember that experience framing a good deal of some of the social awakenings that I took with me both out of undergrad and into some of my early advocacies through blogs and periodical writing and whatnot. And that's really where I began kind of some of the public intellectual work. And I'm saying all this because at the time, the climate felt very much like, if you want to try to work for an idea of the common good, you need to work with a particular kind of a group. And within that group, your politics are probably fine, but you should probably leave your identity at the door. And for me, that was fine, because I believe in those politics. I still believe in those politics, the common good, solidarity, But as time went on, though, I found myself more and more wanting to open the door to not only have to check things at the door all the time, but to also be able to bring yourself and your identity. And I think that's what I'm seeing today. No longer today do I see these very tight discussions. I see the discussions opening up. And I'm also realizing more and more the contact with the discussions that came before. Last thing, I just watched the amazing address of Servant of God, Thea Bauman, to the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops in 1989. And it's so radical and it's so exciting. And it fills me with hope looking back. And I think that's one thing that I've also learned, is that a lot of the working forward is also paying attention to and honoring those who came before us.
Absolutely. And what a great day to remember Thea Bowman. That's wonderful. I'd like to now sort of shift a little bit and maybe come back to you, Brenda, and talk a little bit more in detail about what do you think is the most important issue? We're at a time when we have so much going on at the border. We faced a crisis in the economy, racial injustice. What do you think is the most important issue facing young Latinos right now from your perspective in light of all of this? And how do you think, what principles should guide, what pieces of our...
I think of Rose, but I think it was about the principles. So I think, first of all, I understand immigration, is crucial and everything, but I think the first issue that we need to address is the original sin of this country, which is racism. I think we need to reach to the root of racism, because even if we have... I think once we recognize the dignity, the dignity of every single person, every single individual, and we recognize that everybody is an asset to the country, to the tapestry of society, then everything else is gonna not be fixed automatically, but everything else is going to trickle down, right? We're going to have a better economic system. We're going to have a better immigration system. So I will say racism, and just want to mention something really quick, because we're talking about resources. And one of the gifts of the pandemic, I will say, is that we are doing the journeying together in our cultural encounter of youth and young adults from the USCCB. And it was one conference, and from one conference it went to 1 year process with intercultural conversations, learning about each other cultural families, and also learning about what hurts each one of the communities and how we can address it together as a church. And now we're going into 2 years of conversations, and I think that is a huge gift from the pandemic. But I will say the first value principle, recognizing the human dignity, and the first thing or issue to attend, and that concerns to us as Latinos as well, it's racism. And so I think as Latinos, Hispanic Latinos, we've been having the spotlight for some years. We're still suffering, but we've been having the spotlight. And so how do we now share the spotlight with other communities, for example, the Asian American Pacific Islanders community that are going through a lot so much right now.
And that's the great Catholic. It's not either or, it's both and, right? I mean,
Yes.
This is not a choice here. I'd like to shift gears for a moment before we switch to questions from the audience, and we will shift to questions from the audience right after this. But I wonder if, some people are saying that the COVID-19 pandemic is going to be, for your generation, is going to be the defining moment, really. Do you think that's true? And years from now, what do you think you will remember about this time? Maybe, Alma, could we start with you on that one?
Sure. The answer would be yes. In my point of view, it's definitely a defining moment. It's a defining moment because it has forced us to not only live in the physical world, but also in the digital world, and how to be effective, how to continue to work, and how to strengthen relationships, even if it's through a laptop or even if it's through a phone. So I think that has accelerated the pace by which we engage with others and the social behavior that we adopt. I do think it's a defining moment for businesses because it has also forced businesses to rethink of how they used to do their business and conduct their operations. And we've seen how health was not even considered by many executives in the business community, or even in the regulatory and policy arena. So I think it is a defining moment because it has completely shifted the way that we think and the way that we also approach future problems. So that's my perspective on my world, or what I do from Monday to, I don't want to say Friday because at times it's from Monday to Sunday. It's that I learned how I don't have to be traveling all day long or every week to have a meeting. I can be as effective by going down to my studio and working, and that I don't have to be physically with someone in order to get to know that person. People are in need of being heard, in need of having a conversation with somebody else, and that can be done without necessarily being physically in the same room with someone. So that is what I think contributes to why this is a defining moment also.
How about you, Audrey? What do you think? And particularly when I think about the arts community, right? I mean, how will this feel looking back on it decades from now?
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of changes are obviously happening given that we can't physically gather in person. I think an element of the virtual world will remain when we gather for shows again. However, at the same, I think that this year has shown us how important presence is still, that there is a magic to being in front of someone singing into a microphone or sharing a vulnerable poem, and that we need that magic. And to a degree that's possible, it can be delivered virtually. And I think that there are hundreds of artists who have moved heaven and earth to try to retain a sense of that presence. I think that is one of the characteristics I love most about Latino culture, that we want to walk with someone else, and we want to be physically together. And even if we can't do that always in person, or it requires more planning and logistics, that we are now even more hungry to collaborate. I think this moment is defining in the sense that this is not just one pandemic. There are multiple pandemics that are raging outside of healthcare, and that we live in an interdependent community. So I don't know if this is I don't know if this is the defining period for the arts, but it is certainly one of them.
Thanks so much for that. Sam, I'd like to take this first question from our audience to you. And I want to start back up a little bit by saying just the fact of us here on this Zoom call in our comfortable locations shows that we are speaking from a certain place of privilege. And someone rightly says, let's take our attention to the border right now, where people are really struggling for survival, and they're leaving violence and economic desperation, and they're making their way here to the US. They've got a very uncertain future to them. Connections between the conversation between our group here and those people suffering at the border, and how can we all stand in solidarity?
Yeah, well, the situation at the border has always, by the way, been complex. The fact that there is a border is itself a complex thing historically. I tend to resist the sort of politics of oversimplification that insist on treating complex things with simplified, clear policy or talk whenever the things themselves aren't very simple. But one of the things about the border, and this carries into what Brenda was talking about, is that a lot of the situation at the border is itself tied up in a great deal of anti-indigenous racism within Latin America. So a lot of the people coming here from Central America are not, they are classed within indigena communities, within very unstable nations that themselves were destabilized in many cases by U.S. intervention. And so there's actually a racialized component to the border situation that if we took that lens to it, I actually think we would better understand what some of the root causes, some of the source issues are. One of my real concerns, though, with the border, and this just comes from the fact that, being, born in the Rio Grande Valley and having my father's family there and everything, is that I've seen since the 1990s, whenever I lived in the Colonia Lázaro Cárdenas in Reynosa, and would come back and forth between Reynosa and McAllen, 2-3 times a week. They had air conditioning in the public library, so I'd go and read books and stuff. I've seen that entire way of life change. And of course, it changed while I was there when the maquiladoras came in, and they threw out the farmers and the agricultural classes on the promise of prosperity and progress. Whenever that industrialization took place with those particular tariff laws and things like that, it destabilized an entire region. And now we have the carteles there, which of course weren't there in the 90s when I was there, but they are now. And so for me, these waves of destabilizations that often come from the very sources that people turn to then from hope later on, are very complicated. But in terms of moral analysis, I think they require a deeper sense of moral responsibility from the root sources that we've seen. And so, any analysis today of the war on drugs, for instance, over the last 30 or 40 years, doesn't exactly put Latin American corruption as above all in terms of moral terms. A lot of that comes back to not only the consumer base in the United States, but also the policies of the war on drugs from Nixon forward. So I think that what COVID is going to be is it's going to be a world historical event. And I hope that we can realize that world historical events require historically informed policy and not merely pragmatic, immediate, simplified answers. And whenever we do that, I think the analyses of race, the analyses of capitalism, the analyses of the effects of industrialization, the analyses of neoliberalism, as we read in Fratelli Tutti and other places, the rise of authoritarianism, what does Bolsonaro have to do with Trump, have to do with Biden, have to do with protectionism, have to do with why Canada couldn't buy vaccines until a month ago, right? These are all layered and complex things, and I think we have to be able to deal with them at that scale.
Oh, absolutely. It is very complex. And I always come back, I think when we're talking here tonight, I also am reminded of just the thousands of young Latinos there at the border, and thinking about how we can, again, come from our complexity to back to those faces and names who are there. And now I want to go to the next question, and maybe Amal will take this first to you. How can young Latinos stand up for our values, for human rights and human life and dignity, justice in our personal and professional and public lives? We're all part of institutions that fall short, as Sam was just pointing out. And how can we act with integrity within that kind of a context?
My answer to that question would be to be your own authentic self. Usually I found many people to try to imitate or replicate others on what they do or how they behave or how they act, and try to fragment their life from Monday to Friday at work, be one person, from Friday to Saturday, be another person with friends, and then Sundays, go to mass and be another person. So my point is, be your own self in every bubble that you're in, because with that, a consequence of that will be that you will tropicalize your activism and your advocacy in a way that suits who you are. And you'll bring your own authentic self to every situation. And with that, the result will be that you are being proactive in trying to achieve whatever battle you want to fight or whatever issue you want to address. So that's the way that I would envision it.
Thanks so much. And Brendan, maybe I'll come to you and please react to that if you would like. We're also getting a lot of questions in that I want to kind of combine together, asking about what brings us all here together in a common bond of our Catholic faith this Holy Week, and asking, do you think people will go back to church after this? What will young Latinos do with that? What kind of devotions and prayers have sustained you during this time? Love for you to start us off, and if anybody else wants to jump in on those questions as well.
I think we need to remember and keep in mind that faith is very important for young Latinos, right? That's something we carry with us, especially when we immigrate or when we come to this country. That's something that our parents or grandparents bring with them. So also popular piety. Let's pay a lot of attention to popular piety. I think that sustains our faith and our traditions for Hispanic Latinos. For me personally, it has been the community prayers, gathering a group of my friends or gathering, we actually with Marino, we have young adult communities across the country. And so having one-on-ones with them, having even and praying individually with each one of them, doing faith sharing, I think that has sustained me. The rosary, of course, and the bishop was saying, we have Mama Mary, we don't only have Christ. And so I would say any devotional with the Hispanic Latinos, young people, any devotionals and any popular piety. Don't underestimate the power of a virtual pilgrimage, because that is going to help the heart of the young people, and it's going to help them to be connected as well to their backgrounds and their roots.
I'd love to hear what you have to say about that. You spoke a lot about presence earlier, and I'd love to kind of get your thoughts on this difference between sort of in-person and virtual faith, and what sustained you.
Thank you. What I would add to what Brenda mentioned is, and what I would add to the question and how it was raised, it's not whether young Latinos will go to church after COVID, but how will the church go to young Latinos? How will the church engage with those that usually pre-COVID, there was a crisis, that young people were not going to service, or were not even incorporating their faith into their daily life. So how will the church be innovative in going to those people, in trying to attract more faithful people? And how will the church also address the huge issues that it's currently addressing, with a whole host of scandals that have been at the center right now of the church? So before even thinking about how Latinos will go to mass and what mass will go, and if it will be in Spanish, in Latin, or in English, or in Portuguese, is how will the church as an institution be able to be innovative and inclusive and creative in the method that it also engages with the community.
Couldn't agree more. What a great way to frame that. Audrey, how about you? What do you think about this question? How do you think the church can either go to young people? How has faith sustained you? What kind of practices have been something that's really you've drawn strength from during this time?
That was beautifully said. So I won't try to paraphrase that. I think one of the important questions that we're all asking ourselves is, what does community mean? Are we talking about our family? Are we talking about our neighborhood, our city, our Latin heritage, our American heritage, or nationally? And Sam said that this is a global historic pandemic, which it is. And I think that the challenges that we're seeing are not affecting any one community, but they are affecting different communities in different ways. And it requires each of us to ask, how do I take care of my own, first of all, but then who else is in need that maybe I haven't been taking care of and haven't seen as my own that I should, and that I have a moral obligation to take care of. Very briefly, on a personal note, I'm also a poet, Sam, so we should exchange poems. And a lot of the writing that I've done in the last few years have focused specifically on craftsmanship and people who make things by hand. And one of the conversations that I had early on in COVID was with a priest, because I wanted to ask him, wow, how are you leading a congregation right now in this moment? And I caught him while he was building a workbench. He's also a carpenter, which, in this Holy Week, I think is particularly fitting. And he said that this is a time to listen and to slow down. And I think that regarding faith, even when we can't live in the Holy Spirit together in a community, we're finding ways to connect spiritually with ourselves and with each other by slowing down, by taking the care of building things by hand. I know a lot of us have taken on new hobbies like sourdough, but also taking care of the people in our community.
Thanks so much. How about you, Sam? What kind of devotions have sustained you? How do you see faith supporting people this past year? And I also wonder if you might speak just very briefly, we're almost out of time, to the idea that Catholic social teachings, principles like the option for the poor and vulnerable, the promotion of the common good might help reconnect people with their faith after this year of isolation.
Yeah, maybe just a kind of artistic note, and then one example of a prayer, and then a bit on Catholic social teaching. So the one of the things that's always struck me ever since I was a kid, during Advent and during Lent, there were always processions in my grandparents' neighborhoods. So we'd have the Posadas in Advent, and we would have the Stations of the Cross during Lent. And one of the things that I always loved about these periods of time was a lot of the music. And one of the things I noticed in terms of the processions in Lent was that this song Perdona tu Pueblo it has this deep minor key. It's like a minor key that comes from the very depths of the earth. It's this very big minor sound. Perdona tu pueblo, Señor. Like it gets really in there. And I always noticed that the song of Easter, Resucitó, is also in that same minor key. And I've always thought that was very beautiful and interesting, how this particular kind of Latin expression of Lent and Easter, because Jesus carries his wounds after resurrection. And that's his testimony to the world. That's the stigmata. That's a way. And I think that in many ways, a Latin Catholicism has a certain cultural capacity to appreciate this minor key and these wounds. And that to me carries us into Catholic social teaching, because I think more than anything, Catholic social teaching is first and foremost about the fact that the realities of the brokenness of our world are not exceptions to the gospel, but that is precisely where we see the face of Christ. And so for me, whether it's the favelas of Brazil or the ejidos of Mexico, or it's the rural poverty, which we never talk about in America, these are places I think where Catholic social teaching is built and meant to address, and I think it's where we need to take it more and more, both in our spiritual lives, but also within our political and social realities.
Thanks so much for that, Sam. And thanks to all of you. Thanks, Alma. Thanks, Brenda. Thanks, Audrey. And again, Sam. Thanks to Bishop Dorsonville. And thanks to all of you for joining us. What a wonderful way to end this discussion. I just want to remind everybody that this will all be recorded and posted on our website and social media channels for later viewing as well. And also that we will have follow-up resources from this discussion posted at our site too. I want to preview a few coming attractions. In mid-April, we'll hold a major public dialogue on immigration challenges and choices, people, principles, and policies. And then in early May, we'll have a parallel related Salt and Light and Latino leader gathering also on immigration challenges and new leadership and the continuing challenges that we face. Please be sure to visit our website for details about this and other gatherings. I want to thank all of you who've joined us here tonight for this online Latino leader gathering. And as a reminder, this will be posted on our website. I want to thank everybody who's helped us on the technical end of this dialogue. Thanks to my colleagues, John Carr and Anna Misla, for everything they do to make this go so smoothly. And finally, thanking Alma Caballero, Brenda Noriega, Sam Rocha, and Adriana Smith for their outstanding participation in this roundtable discussion. All best to you all and have a great night.